And good afternoon, everyone, and what a great day. Only if South Africa can actually be aware of the significance of this particular case. And the reason why South Africa is not yet aware of the significance of this particular case, because the Tripartite Alliance has made it difficult for South Africans to understand what this case is about. They've projected this case as a case of people who are anti-revolution, people who are there to protect white monopoly capital. I don't know what that is. It's about people who want to reverse the gains made by COSATU. It's about they project in this case to really be to promote slave wages. And this case has got absolutely nothing to do with any of this. And fortunately enough, 3 years later, in 13 days' time, fortunately enough, our judiciary is going to really deal with the constitutionality of Section 32 of the Labour Relations Act, not with all the other issues that the Tripartite Alliance wanted South Africans to believe, including really using threats, using intimidation. Immediately upon us launching this case, in fact, even before launching this case, started saying that there'll be bloodbath in the streets, including coming up with threats, to me in particular, that my companies and my products should really be boycotted. But fortunately enough, such threats and intimidation just really strengthened my resolve in ensuring that poor South Africans, strengthened my resolve to ensure that small business in particular also gets protected. I was just not really prepared to sit back on the sidelines and watch people being destroyed in this fashion. Had been destroyed by the government that is claiming to care. I've been a businessman in this country over 30 years of my life, during the dark days of this country's history. The National Party government did everything possible not to allow us as black business to make any progress. And I was fortunate enough, my entry into the business world, particularly when I identified an opportunity in the cosmetic industry. My particular industry made it possible for the National Party to hold us back. In fact, I look at the cosmetic industry, the hair care one in particular, how I related the same as the taxi industry. Because when the explosion of this industry started happening, there was just no way the National Party would ever stop them. Salons were opening in every corner of the township, village, cities, which were at the time declared white cities. But black entrepreneurs emerged under those circumstances. And I can proudly say to South Africa and the world, I was instrumental. I was really privileged to witness such an emergence of entrepreneurship in our country under extremely difficult conditions. For some reason, 27th of April 1994, all of us voted for our new democracy, excited with the prospects that apartheid was gone. We thought apartheid, freedom is there. We thought oppression of our people is a thing of the past. Here we are, 21 years later. I really look at the development of small business, particularly black business in this country. How this government has destroyed small business. This time, we're using bargaining councils, using labor laws to get rid and destroy small business. Was it intentional? Did they have noble ideas? It's not really about having noble ideas, it's about the results. The results, here we are 21 years into our democracy. Black entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship, that used to be there pre-1994. Today, entrepreneurship that we see is the one that obviously encouraged through getting involved in tenders, getting involved in being closer to government. It really killed the creativity of our people. This piece of legislation, I was really quite lucky when I took over as the chairman of the Free Market Foundation. I remember calling Leon for lunch, asking Leon to really help. Always admired Leon as a member of the Free Market Foundation and his team about the great work that they were doing. Unfortunately for me, that lunch actually turned my life around, because when I wanted to talk to Leon, was to talk to Leon about how we can obviously really get his message to the broader community of our country, that we're the casualties of this bad administration and bad policies. In the process, discovered that Leon needed much more than financial assistance. He needed other capacity. And for my sin, I became the chairman of this great foundation. Immediately upon taking over this responsibility, I was fortunate enough to convince my colleagues on the board that times of writing articles, times of addressing media like this, it's over. I said to Leon and the team, we live in a democratic country, constitutional democracy. Let us act. And fortunately enough, my colleagues agreed with me, resulting with us on the 5th of April, 3 years ago, launching this particular case. I think Craig will really share with you the devastating effects of this particular piece of legislation. Right now, I know media and other people, they are under the impression in Uganda it's a big story. Yes, it's a big story from a public consumption perspective. Government and the President Zuma only spent 250 million rands, only 250 million rands. This piece of legislation has destroyed families, has destroyed lives, has destroyed small businesses. I don't really believe anyone can actually measure the financial impact of this piece of legislation, because it's not just really the money. It destroyed families, it destroyed communities, it destroyed the creativity of small business in this country. It deprived 8.5 million South Africans from getting employment. Are people aware of this? Is it our fault, maybe, that we did not communicate this properly? We've been trying, and we are still trying, to really get South Africans to actually be aware of the impact of this piece of legislation, which allows the Minister of Labour to extend agreements to non-parties. And when they talk about non-parties, they're talking about small businesses that do not really have the capacity to defend themselves. When they talk about non-parties, they talk about the unemployed South Africans who believes government is there for them. In the meantime, it's the government that's actually preventing them from working. And I'm looking at it, what has government got to do with preventing people from working? Are there any particular benefits that they get out of this? In the beginning, I used to actually believe that it was pure ignorance. But lately, I believe it's intentional. I believe getting our people poor, destroying small business, with the Stafford Alliance. It's not an accident, it's not mismanagement, it's deliberate as far as I'm concerned. And the reason why I'm saying so is because if it was not deliberate, then you correct it. You don't just really defend something like this for over 3 years, and actually including coming out with threats for people who are bringing this to your attention. I've just now, 2 hours ago, I was in the city center just next to the Carlton Center, visiting some of the settlements in our city, right in the heart of Johannesburg. If you don't cry after visiting such settlements and you look at the desperation of our people, and the reason why people are so desperate is because of high unemployment. You look at their living conditions. I keep saying to people, my family every night when I get home, I don't know what to do, because every day I go out, I have to keep on apologizing to people of South Africa and Johannesburg. Because for me as an individual, as a citizen of this country, and a privileged one for that matter, to really look at the living conditions of our people in a country as rich as South Africa, I can only apologize to those people, because their living conditions are totally unacceptable. Last week I visited Alexander, visited Mandela Hospital. I made a statement in front of the media and the world that the living conditions of our people in Alexander are worse than our prisons. And I said to anyone, I challenged them to take me to any prison in this country and compare it with the living conditions of people of Mandela Hospital. And I still really put that challenge to our government. They can take me to any prison of their choice, that we can compare it with innocent people of Alexander. This afternoon, 2 hours ago, I visited a settlement not far from the Carlton Center in the heart of Johannesburg. I compared their living conditions with people of Mandela Hospital. Those conditions are actually even worse. And this is the beautiful South Africa, the city that we're saying it's the world-class city, African world-class city. And I look at this particular case and the effect of this piece of legislation. I strongly believe has been to a large extent responsible for such conditions. So we're excited eventually when we've got a court case, date given to us, 22nd to the 24th of this month. And me personally, I can't actually wait to really get the Minister of Labour to explain to our people as to why she's defended this case, why it has taken her so long to be forced to come to court. And I really challenge you as media, as ordinary South Africans. I urge you, please follow this case very closely so that you really understand the impact, because I don't think I can assure you, this government does not really want you to really know the impact of this court case. They don't really actually want you to really understand why the Free Market Foundation took this matter to court, including taking it to the Constitutional Court if we're forced to. So lucky enough, we're now starting in the High Court, and if need be, that we take it to the Constitutional Court. We will do that without any hesitation. So I can't really, don't really know whether I can say I'm excited or I'm sad, but one thing, I'm glad the fact that eventually our judiciary has given us a court date, because the government did everything possible. The Minister of Labour did everything possible. COSATU did everything possible to ensure that this matter never gets to court. And now you ask yourself, why did they prevent this matter coming to court? Because in any democratic environment, when civil society brings out a matter, a constitutional matter like this, it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that this matter goes to court as soon as possible. then we resolve and move forward. But in this particular case, we ask ourselves as a country as to why it has taken our government so long to be forced to come to court. And I really urge you as the media and as ordinary South Africans, please ask our government, ask the Minister of Labour, why they prevented this matter for over 3 years to eventually come to court. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm really happy later on to really take your questions and answer them to the best of my ability. But I am really, as a South African, I can't say I'm angry, because definitely angry would be an understatement. I'm sad because it deeply hurts me every time when I see our people being made to suffer like this. Our people being turned into public slaves. I thought 27th of April 1997, a voting for freedom. I thought the suffering of our people is a thing of the past. But from where I stand right now and what I've been observing, it looks like we still got a long way to go. And we really need all of us as South Africans to stand up and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. I appreciate your time. I really do want to tell you about as much about this case as possible, but I don't want to be expressing opinions and prejudging what may or may not happen. And I will try and tell you as much as I can without breaching that promise or undertaking. Importantly, I think we must begin with what this case is not about. We've heard a lot from people who have misconstrued this case, and that includes many of the people involved in the case and opposing the case. It is not about undermining collective bargaining. It is not, and we don't believe that it can and should undermine collective bargaining. And we reserve our opinions in respect to other elements of collective bargaining, and we focus on one very, very crisp section. In March, in fact the 4th of March 2013, we launched the case to have section 32(2) amended. That is simply to prevent the minister being compelled to extend collective agreements to non-parties simply because the parties who concluded the agreement so-called requests her to do so when in fact instructs her to do so. That, we say, is problematic. Why? Because those ordinarily concluding these agreements do not represent the majority, do not speak on behalf of, we say, a proper number of employers and or employees, and they collude. It is in the interests of big business and unions to up the conditions of employment to the extent that they constitute barriers of entry to entrepreneurs and crush smaller employers. And this, we say, is a problem. And quite frankly, I don't think there's a dispute about the fact that this provision has an impact on employment in this country. I think at best the debate is about the extent of that impact. The argument, as I understand it from the other side, will be that if we are successful, it will be the end of collective bargaining in South Africa and or unions. I don't believe that that follows. One needs merely to look at the fact that it is only in the 1995 Act, which became effective in 1996, that this must word came into our legislation. From as far back as 1924, the Industrial Conciliation Act, the discretion was there and has been there consistently. So in March 2013, the case was launched amongst great fanfare and, as Herman indicated, even threats of blood in the streets. It has taken us 3 years to get to court, which has disappointed and frustrated us immensely. The reason for the delay, apart from the fact that, to be frank, it does take time to get to court, but this is extraordinarily long. And the reason for that can be linked to various matters or reasons rather. And firstly, we had the respondents who took an incredibly long time to file documents. Once that had been done or was almost reaching final stages, unions and COSATU sought to intervene. which served to create further delays. And we have other sideshows as well. We have 27 defendants, or respondents, I apologize, 27. That is 23 bargaining councils, the Minister of Labour, COSATU, SACTU, South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union, that is, and NUMSA. 4 of the 23 bargaining council are public sector bargaining councils who curiously want to be heard by the court under circumstances where the extension provision doesn't apply to them. They're a single employer and seeking to have your day in court under circumstances where this legislation can't impact on you because the single employer concludes an agreement with the unions and there's no other employer to extend it to. So that's somewhat curious as well. We argue that the provision is unlawful and unconstitutional. And the argument is along the following lines. Firstly, it is unlawful because it is a private and accountable to the public that is essentially creating legislation and or imposing terms and conditions of employment on non-parties. That is problematic and that is very central to this case. The respondents, without exception, argue that the bargaining councils are public bodies, and they've got great difficulty with that, not the least of which is if it was a public body taking a decision, one would ordinarily have the right to challenge that decision by way of review. And once you don't have that right, I don't understand fully how we get to the argument that they are a public body. But that is central to it. Why must a public body create legislation or impose its will on others? Because the public body is accountable to the electorate. One way or another, the electorate can get rid of that public body through the ballot box and various other ways. And of course, it can be challenged for rationality and compliance with other processes if it is a public body. That doesn't apply in this case. We argue, or will be arguing, that the section impacts directly on the right to freedom of association. That is because people who actively choose not to get involved in these things find themselves bound and affected by it as if they were party to the process when they consciously elected not to be party to that process. We argue that it frustrates or infringes the right to fair administrative action. That's linked to the first point because we can't challenge it. There's no rationality. It doesn't have to be in the interests of the public. They don't have to hear from non-parties before they make these decisions. And that, we say, is extremely problematic. It impacts on the right to dignity. We, and surveys show, we believe in surveys confirm, that there are people who want to work at lower rates of work. There are people who want to employ them. There are people who would rather work for lower rates of pay than sit at home and do nothing, lose their dignity and or rummage through dustbins as we see. That impacts that. And of course, we say this impacts directly on the right to fair labour practices. The respondents argue that we run the risk of a race to the bottom in terms and conditions of employment. I, with respect, don't follow that, and it's perhaps an insult to the Minister of Labour to argue that. The suggestion in that argument is that bargaining councils will then put terms and conditions before the Minister which are unsatisfactory or too low. Well, then the Minister doesn't extend them. She exercises her discretion against extending them. And so we go, and I don't quite follow that. Another central argument against our case is the fact that bargaining council agreements can only be extended if there is a provision in them for exemptions. We have numerous problems with that argument. The first, of course, is that if the extension itself is unlawful, unconstitutional, well then talking about exemptions from that unlawful decision is nonsensical. you're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. But more importantly, no. Secondly, I think once it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. But in any event, exemption applications are notoriously difficult. They take time. To be fair, the latest amendment to the LRA, the only amendment anywhere near this section, is that exemptions must now be finalised within 30 days. Well, again, this doesn't happen, or I'm not aware of it happening in any case I've been involved in since this legislation came into effect. But of course, the problem is much deeper than that. You're applying initially for exemption from people who were ordinarily party to the decision to impose this on you in the first place. So the first stage of exemption is at bargaining council level itself, made up of employers and employers and employee representatives who support this. So to get those people who supported the decision in the first place to overturn or find exceptional circumstances is difficult. Yes, there is provision for it to go to an external body, but that is cumbersome and a long way down the line. But the real problem with that is that in order to get exemption, you need to be in the industry, involved and party to what's happening. Now, many people would love to invest in this country, but can't meet the conditions of employment that have been extended to non-parties. They can't say, I want to know if I start my business in South Africa and invest X amount, will you give me exemption for a particular period of time while I ramp up and get my business off the ground? They can't do that. They've got to invest the money and take their chances. And that, we say, discourages investment. The court sitting on the 22nd to the 25th of February is a special sitting of the court in Pretoria by special arrangement because of the importance of this matter. And I'm pleased to say that we've been granted, which is a discretion that rests with the Judge President, to give us a full bench. That is, 3 judges will be hearing the matter rather than 1. And we've been advised who the judges are. They're the Judge President himself, Judge Mlambo, Judge Basson, who now is a judge of the High Court, who was a judge of the Labour Court, and Judge Murphy, who also has been sat in the Labour Court and is familiar with labour matters. Where will this case go? Herman has alluded to the fact that we anticipate that it will go to the Constitutional Court. Perhaps a question some may ask is whether it will go through the Supreme Court of Appeal on its way to the Constitutional Court. There is a provision in our law to go directly to the Constitutional Court. That is something obviously is down the line and would be canvassed amongst the parties themselves at a later stage. But it almost certainly will find itself before the Constitutional Court. And we believe that the Constitutional Court will grant the relief that we seek. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think that it served a practical purpose for this economy, the country as a whole, and certainly the economy, and certainly wouldn't be here if we didn't believe we had prospects of success. And that is our view, and I'll gladly answer specific questions once we've heard from Leon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
Yes, I explain some of the aspects from the Free Market Foundation's point of view. Firstly, let me make it clear, because our former chairman, Herman, is now, as everyone knows, politically active. The Free Market Foundation has absolutely nothing to do with that. We're completely politically agnostic and neutral, and we work with, and have often worked with, continue to work with all the political parties. And so the tendency to create some kind of imaginary association there is quite wrong, and for 40 years there has been no compromising of our political neutrality. Even in this case, we're not particularly anti the government or anti the ANC as a party, or the alliance, which is, at least in theory, 3 groups. We are taking a constitutional case, and our view is that the Minister of Labour ought not to be opposing us, but ought to be supporting it, because the Minister's opposition to the case has truly bizarre and weird implications. What we're asking here is to give the Minister the power to think about what she does. And I want to put that in very plain language. The Act at the moment says that private people enter into a contract, a collusive contract, you heard the word from Craig, let me make that point, that but for the specific exemption, this would be extremely illegal under the competition law. This is absolute collusion about price, and is allowed because of the special case of labour, and we don't oppose that. We don't oppose the right to collude, which is what central bargaining is. But what we oppose is the right for the colluders to impose their collusive agreement on non-colluders. This is rather like allowing Woolworths and Pick and Pay to collude on prices, and then Macro has to abide by their agreement. That is the equivalent in, say, retail, and would clearly be a very bizarre state of affairs. So one thing is to allow collusion, another is to force people to collude, which is what you've done if you have to be a member of the bargaining council, and then of course to extend it to people who stayed out of the collusion. So what we're saying is that the Minister is now being told by private colluders that she must impose the collusion on non-colluders, and this is a very bizarre thing. You'd expect the Minister to say, yes, this is unacceptable. I would like the ability to think. I would like the right to think about what I do. I would like the right to apply my mind to my actions. So we find it quite strange. We expected the Minister of Labour to do what the Ministry of Justice has done, and actually stay out of the case, or even support it. So we don't see ourselves here as against the Minister or against Labour. On the contrary, we see ourselves as in favour of the Minister. We are wanting to empower the Minister. And so it did come as a surprise to us that there was an opposition, and it might just be some kind of formality. I suppose there's a sort of assumption that if somebody challenges a law, the government must oppose it without really thinking it through. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what the Minister's Council argues before the court. I represent the Minister, and I am told by the Minister that she does not want the right to think. I mean, will the Council really stand up and say that? Because that will be the implication of what the Council has to say. Obviously, it will be put in more jurisprudential language, and it will be made to look more sexy. But that is the implication of what the Minister's lawyers are going to be saying to the judges. Please don't give my Minister the right to think. And then it goes further. The bargaining councils, we've heard that 23 are opposing. There were originally 27, 4 of which have withdrawn. And we hope more will withdraw, by the way. There are initiatives behind the scenes that might lead to a last-minute withdrawal of various bargaining councils. Whether they should be there at all is itself interesting, because they have only the powers conferred on them by Section 27 of the Labour Relations Act, and any statutory body has only the power that are given to it, powers that are given to it within the four corners of the statute, and there is no power in the Act whereby they can contest a constitutional case. It's even more strange than that, because they are created by this Act. So a body created by an Act to go to court and argue about the constitutionality of the Act that creates them is also very odd. You'd expect them to be passive bystanders and wait to see what happens. They should not have a position on whether or not the Act that creates them is constitutional. But certainly, and this is why some might withdraw, is some of the members of these councils have suddenly realized that these councils appear to have taken on this case without any mandate. You know, the staff of the councils, obviously they have and the excos of the councils obviously have a vested interest in their power and their status and their income and their revenue and so on. And so they would like their powers to continue to exist. But the members, the businesses and the trade unions, some of which we know support us, both trade unions and businesses, they are beginning to say, but hold on a sec, why is my bargaining council opposing this? They have no mandate. They shouldn't be going there and arguing one way or the other. They should be neutral on the matter. So it'll be interesting to see, and we are hoping that there will be a last-minute withdrawal by some, if not all, bargaining councils. And then as to the minister, as to the unions, that too is interesting. Strangely enough, the unions, and some unions do realize this, will be by far the biggest beneficiaries if we succeed. Because if we succeed, there will be many more jobs created, there will be many more people employed, and many more people to join unions. And if 7.5 or 8 million, or now approaching 9 million unemployed people, if half of them can become employed, you could see a doubling of the size of some of the unions and their bargaining power and their constituencies. So again, we don't think the unions ought to be opposing us. We think maybe some of them don't fully understand what we're asking for in this case. Then, why is the Free Market Foundation interested in the matter at all? Well, I suppose we're human beings and we're concerned about the destitution and the suffering of unemployed people. And I want to pause there for a moment and ask you just to think about this. We live in a country which has the highest rate of sustained unemployment in the world. The worst unemployment on planet Earth. Some countries fleetingly and briefly have higher rates than we do, but none continues for year after year after year at this rate. These people are destitute. They have nothing to do, they have no income, and many or most of them do not qualify for social grants. Then we have a stagnating economy. One of the reasons is that if 8 million workers, 40% of your workforce, are not producing anything, well, of course the economy is poor. We want to see these people being productive and generating the wealth with which not only they can be employed, but with which the country's economy can start growing. But actually, in the end, that's not even what it's about for us. It's not even about the right of association, the right of people to decide whether or not they want to be in on a deal. What happens now is that if you are in a given industry and you know that you are going to be governed by a bargaining council agreement, you might as well be at the table. You better go there. So we know some very big businesses have spoken to us, our members, and they participate and they enter into these agreements and they require the minister to extend them. But they've said to us they would prefer to bargain by themselves with their own unions. They would prefer to compete with their competitors on labour relations. They don't want to be there. They're there because they are going to be governed by an agreement to which they are not a party. So they might as well be at the table and try and get it to suit them as best they can. But they would prefer not to. And then also, of course, freedom of contract. People should be free to enter into what contract they wish, including, and we want to stress this very, very unambiguously, centralized collective bargaining. We are not only not opposed to it, we are for it. We are for the right of people to enter into whatever arrangements they wish and to contract with whomever they wish. So any suggestion that we have a problem with that is completely unfounded, and anyone who understands free market principles must know that. So anyone who says the contrary either doesn't understand or is being disingenuous. But our real reason is actually much more fundamental and I'm afraid somewhat abstract and makes many people glaze over, and that is simply freedom. We are for freedom. And sometimes we are for freedom even if the consequences might be negative for some people. Our main principle is we want people to have the freedom to decide with whom they agree, negotiate, who employs them, who they employ, what the terms of that are, and that can be at a big centralized bargaining level, and it can be at a one-on-one level of a street vendor employing somebody to operate down the road, as many do. And now to give you some idea of how we work there, here we are supposedly representing the interests of the strange phrase white monopoly capital. Some of you might recall that in November 2014, the Johannesburg City Council used its cleansing department, that's the people who clean streets, the people who sweep gutters, were told under Operation Clean Sweep to clear 8,000 street vendors off the street, human beings. So the City Council department that clears litter was sent to clear humans off the street, people who have no job, who are trying to earn a decent and peaceful living, and who have children that they have to feed that night when they go home after selling boiled millies on the corner of Abel and Harrow Road, for example. Who brought the constitutional case that required the City Council to let them back on the streets? We did. It was nobody supposedly caring about the poor, nobody supposedly caring about the underdog. It was the Free Market Foundation. And the City Council was required by the unanimous decision of the Constitutional Court to let the street traders back onto the streets. I can let you know now that we are currently launching a criminal charge against the City Council because it has continued to operate in violation of the Constitutional Court order. So we are charging them with contempt of court. The papers are now being processed, starting with the prior request for information about how many raids there have been against whom and so on, and to be followed by criminal charges. So that it gives you some idea of who we are and what our interests are. Now we care about them because we're human, but mostly we care about them because we care about freedom. We want the freedom of somebody to trade with somebody else. If I want to sell you some chewing gum or some shampoo or some used clothing, you and I should be free to transact with each other. That is really what we're about. And it's not about big or small. In this case, that's where we are standing. So we, the Free Market Foundation, will fight this case all the way to the Constitutional Court. We are indebted to Herman, who has now chosen to move away from us into a world of politics, but has undertaken to continue to underwrite the cost, which is enormous, and I don't have his permission to tell you what he has already invested personally, not company money, out of his own personal account, over 4 million rand. And he is still with us despite the fact that he's no longer our chairman and he's no longer formally associated with us, but is now in the life of politics. We wish him well. We don't particularly side with any political party or grouping. So with that, we will take this case, if we have to the Constitutional Court. In a way, we would like that, because we would like that gravitas attached to a ruling that this is simply inappropriate and harmful to small businesses. One of the dynamic small business people I know just has walked in at the moment, is in a sense one of the heroes of the New South Africa, running a small business none of you will have heard of, but you should hear of, and get his card from him if you have any carpets to be cleaned later. But that's the sort of person we worry about. Someone like Oscar, who wants to create jobs, who is dynamic and entrepreneurial, and for whom this provision, Section 23 of the Labour Relations Act, has devastating implications. We want to liberate him and the people he employs from that provision. Thank you.